Well, good morning, everyone. This is the updated design, and I left it running overnight for 6 hours and 35 minutes, which equates out to 395 minutes. And I received 165 platinum coin, and as you can tell, an absolute ton of different mimic drops and all that good stuff. So I realize this video is getting kind of dense, and so if people aren't interested in the technicalities of the video, I summarize the data here. After this, I'm going to show you how I collected the data, how I calculated out spawn rates, and how I calculated out money earned per hour based on those. So I'm going to add a timestamp so you can skip all of that if you're not interested in it. But for now, I'll explain the data. I compared Lizard Crusher 1.0 compared to Lizard Crusher 2.0, and the results are astounding. In Lizard Crusher 1.0, I only received 9.38 platinum an hour, which is down 16.62 platinum an hour when compared to version 2.0, which had a flat rate of 25 platinum an hour. Power cells I received was only 30.1 an hour, which is down 36 compared to version 2.0's, which had 66 an hour. I did not collect data for jungle keys and eggs and Yolette yo-yos. But I could use the data from 2.0 to fill in some of the blanks for what I neglected to collect in version 1.0. So based on what I know about power cells in relation to lizard spawns, I calculated out that we're going to get 1,500 lizards an hour based on this old model. Okay. Now, what I know about mimic spawns compared to lizard spawns is that based on my data, we get roughly 128 lizard temple enemies per one mimic spawn. So I used that to divide 1,500 by 128, and that gave me roughly 11 mimics an hour, which is down 14 an hour compared to version 2.0. It's also worth noting that the lizard spawns per hour is about half the lizard spawns per hour that I received in the other build in the version 2.0. Gonna go ahead and count the total mimic drops by basically dumping everything into these chests, so this is gonna look pretty cool, I hope.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. Not out of space. Okay, wait, was that perfect? Yeah, I know I still have some mimic stuff up here, but that made it perfect. Cool.
And to see how many mimics spawned overnight and were killed in the trap, I'm simply just going to count the amount of mimic drops I got. Pretty simple. Okay, well, this is interesting. I ended up getting 164 mimic drops over the course of 395 minutes, which then I'll add another calculator. So that would be 164 divided by 395. And if you remember earlier, I think you already know where this is going. That's the amount of mimics I get per minute, so 0.41. Then we multiply that by 60 minutes to give us an hour. And we're looking at about 25 mimics an hour, which mimics, that's funny, the rate of platinum that I'm earning per hour. So I was earning about 25 platinum an hour, and now I'm getting 25 mimics an hour. Very interesting consistency there. So I went ahead and I recorded the drops I received from lizard type enemies, and so I received 4,215 solar fragments, 439 power cells, 9 eggs, and 14 jungle keys. To calculate out how many solar fragments I received, because it was so early in the morning, it was kind of annoying, but I discovered that lizardmen have a 14.29% chance drop, and lizard temple enemies in general have a 14.29% chance drop to drop either 1 or 2 solar fragments. So I went ahead and I made that 1.5, because I'm looking for consistent data. So I figured probably they all have a 14.29% chance to drop 1.5. That equates out to becoming 4.67 lizardmen will drop 1.5 solar fragments. Before it was 7 lizardmen will always drop 1, and then I realized it was 1 to 2. So I took 7, which is the lizardmen if they were only to drop 1 lizard or 1 solar fragment, and then I divided it by 1.5 because that's the in between number between 1 and 2 is 1.5. So that comes out to be 19,684 lizard potential lizardmen spawned in 395 minutes. For power cells, I got a very similar number, 21,950 in the 395 minutes. For these two, these are both wildly low percent chances, so I'm not going to collect their data because I think these numbers are dramatically skewed. Although now that I think about it, if I were to add it up, let's see, we'd have 35,000 plus 9,000, whoops, divided by 2. So we're looking at a net average for these of around 22,000, which means that data is actually good if I use them against each other. So now I'm going to add up 19,684 plus 21,950 plus 22,000, and I'm going to divide it by 3. So that way I now know that the average drops, or the average lizard min per 395 minutes is 21,211. Now I want to find that in terms of hours. So I'm going to take that number, I'm going to divide it by 395 minutes, because that was the total minute time, giving me 53. Now I want to find the total hour time, a flat hour rate. So I'm going to multiply it by 60, giving me a total of 3,222 lizards spawned per hour. And if I multiply this by 6.5 about, let's around there, it's going to be about 6.6. We're going to look at, oh yeah, so basically the same number, so 21,265. So the math checks out. Okay, so here we can look at the differences between Lizard Crusher 1.0 on video compared to Lizard Crusher 2.0 on video. The very first thing to notice is that the spawn rates in Lizard Crusher 1.0 are much worse, and this is because the height of the platforms that I use in Lizard Crusher 1.0 in terms of ceiling height are much too low. I didn't realize this, but if you want to have really high spawn rates in your builds for your farms, you have to have high ceilings. If you make condensed tunnels like this, you severely cut your spawn rates. So in Lizard Crusher 2.0, I fixed this by making my spawn boxes much higher, and I'll go into the details of that later. But for now, I just wanted to highlight the differences in terms of how these two designs function. So right before we hop into the static image, I want to show you guys the live design, and this is it. It's 3 simple boxes with a kill chamber in the middle, and of course normally everything is spawned inside of here if you stand in the right spot. Thanks. Okay, this is me from the future correcting some of the mistakes I make during the video. 1, the length in between the 2 boulders up top is going to be 96 blocks long. That's the space in between both rows, so that's how you get the intersection I have here. I recommend you do the rows first, the statues first, that way you can build the design around the statues. And secondly, make these side boxes as tall as possible until you run into the statues that are waiting above you. There's no sense in having a lava ceiling if you can use the natural ceiling of the boulder statues. This may increase spawn rates. Okay, but the rest of me is not going to say that, just so you know. Okay, well, first things first, you may be wondering why I completely redid the design. I'm going to go ahead and show you a clip showing that I had originally just changed the platforms, and I'd kept the crushing design the exact same. So I didn't really get to show you the issue with the design, I just got to feature the design. The issue was that enemies were spawning so fast now that they would step on the teleporter pads, and in turn there would still be enemies dying on the killer pads, and so then they would get teleported back to the spawning pads, and it just became this whole mess where I wasn't killing enemies fast enough because they kept getting spawned out. It's kind of like in the beginning of the clip, you saw how I was quote-unquote charging up the teleporter. What was really happening was enemies were swapping places in the teleporters instantaneously fast so they couldn't move. And that was happening before. So I came up with a crosshatch design which would have one centralized teleporter, and I would rely on the knockback of the boulders to hit them out of the way so that they wouldn't get teleported back. And then I designed, the indents and all things like that to keep them more contained in the killing pits. So the very first thing I changed from 1.0 was adding this giant rectangular box to have a whole nother box dedicated to spawns that would be under me. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, why don't I just add more spawn boxes to have even higher spawn rates? For some reason, based on all the different experiments, and I did a little bit of data collecting on this, adding more spawn boxes doesn't actually increase spawn rates. I could be wrong about this, but I think having more spawn boxes might actually decrease spawn rates, but don't quote me on that. It's just something I noticed. The next thing on my list to do was to increase the block height of all of my boxes. I learned through some experimentation that higher ceilings yield higher spawn rates, and so I implemented that into the farm because I realized that I was severely cutting my spawn rates without realizing it. I thought I was getting good rates with 9 platinum an hour. Now I realized that's a really bad rate. Thirdly, I studied how far away mobs will spawn to, and I learned that horizontally it's 62 to 84 blocks, while vertically it's like 35 to 47 blocks. And I took that data in accounting and I designed my platform so that these encompass the 62 to 84 block range. And so that this one encompasses that 35 to 47 block range, just barely. And the last major change is that instead of having 3 in teleporters, I have 1 kill teleporter. And that's connected to all of these platforms using different color wires to separate the teleportation. In other words, these wires are not connected to one another, or else mobs would spawn from here to here to here to here to here. So let's get a little bit more specific now. Let's take a look at this spawning box specifically. And it's important to note that these two mirror one another, so I'm not going to waste my time talking about this one. The first thing to notice is that it's 20 blocks high and 22 blocks long, as well as being starting 62 blocks away from me. Like I said, horizontal spawn ranges, meaning the distance that mobs will spawn away from us to right or left, is 62 to 84 blocks. So this 62 blocks starts here, and then it goes 22 blocks in this direction, which adds up to 84, placing them perfectly within my spawn block range. At the bottom of each trap, I have a super dart trap. I know this says poison, but I have a super dart trap that is activated every couple seconds to shoot and hit mimics so that they become aggro and get farmed in my trap as well. Along this top row, I have buttons. Buttons do not stop spawn rates. Buttons do not have any effect on it at all. So immediately anything that spawns will hit a button, which is connected through these blocks to a teleporter, and the mobs will be teleported through the blocks to our center teleporter. All these teleporters are connected to a yellow wire, which connects to only the right side of this teleporter, only that right cluster of pixels. It's important to note that these walls are 2 blocks thick. That's so that enemies don't accidentally end up teleporting through these blocks and getting out. So all of these are going to be 2 blocks thick. Now we can take a look at my blue wiring section, which is going to be this bottom platform. So this orange rectangle symbolizes the platform. It's just too dark to see. So the platform's bottom, meaning where the mobs are going to spawn at, is about 44 blocks away from my head. That is just barely within that 35 to 47 block range for the vertical spawning distance, but it works just fine. The rectangle is 62 blocks long as well as 32 blocks tall, giving mobs plenty of overhead. Now let's talk about the wiring. So the wiring is connected by a blue wire in the exact same setup as my other boxes. We have a line of red pressure plates which are attached to a block, a lizard block, which is attached to a teleporter. Mobs will be teleported through the block up into this middle section of the teleporter. You may have noticed that I have a weird zigzag. That is because I need to increase the length of wiring in order to reach this center teleporter. That way, this teleporter will be considered the end destination teleporter because it takes the longest stretch of wire to reach it. That's how teleporters work with one another when you have multiple teleporters, like over 2. And the simplest part of the build is the green wiring. So the green wiring's job is to connect my entrance and exit teleporters. Okay guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching. If I didn't explain something clearly enough, don't be afraid to leave a question in the comments and I'll go ahead and reply to that. Thanks.